Our public schools are a place where all kids feel like they belong.
My children.
My family. My community.
All students. All students.
All students belong in a great public school.
Let's get ready for back to school at nea.org/backtoschool.
You walk in tired and hungry, one bad dinner away from losing it. You don't like to cook. You don't want more takeout. You just want something good. That's why there's Dish by Blue Apron. Pre-made meals with at least 20 grams of protein and no artificial flavors or colors. From fridge to fork in 5 minutes or less. Keep the flavor. Ditch the subscription. Get 20% off your first 2 orders with code APRON20. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
Hello, it's Martin here, and welcome to another episode of Away the Podcast. And today you are joining us for an episode of On This Week, where we delve, as usual, into some key events that have happened in the history of Sunderland AFC. So today we are covering the 23rd to the 29th of June. And as always, there's an awful lot to get through. So joining me today to help do that is a man who, according to the forums, right? Actually, you can guess which one of you it is. According to the forums, this person is always a joy to listen to and is up there with Rob Mason for his Sunderland knowledge. Anyone want to claim that one? It's Kelvin. It's Kelvin. How are you, Kelvin? It's not a bad review.
That's I'll take that review any day of the week. Somebody once said I look like Harrison Ford. I'll stick it up there along with that. Yeah.
Harrison Ford, Rob Mason, Kelvin Beattie. Never been seen in the same room together.
Morning.
And also joining us today as usual, it's Chris Wynn. How are you, mate? And which film star have your good looks been compared to?
Oh, I don't know. I'm sure my mates will say that fella off the Goonies. But other than that, I'm not quite sure. Maybe Shrek. I don't know. Let's go along those lines, eh?
And I'm not gonna make any comparison at all. I'm just gonna leave it to. That's the thing with audio, isn't it? You don't know what anybody looks like really. And the last person to join us, but certainly not least, is Andrew Smithson. How are you, mate?
I'm good, thanks. And as you say, because it's audio, I think I'll tell everyone I look a lot like Schwarzenegger. You know, I'm built like Arnie Schwarzenegger, and there's nobody can prove otherwise.
With the looks of George Clooney.
Yeah. What can I say?
And the suave sophistication of Brad Pitt. There you go. We're very fortunate to be joined by somebody so special. So 38 years ago today, 38 years ago on the 23rd of June, so 1987, I'm sure lots of people will remember David Bowie, who brought his glass spider tour to Roker Park. Pissing down with rain, I think. And he comes on and says,
Good evening, Newcastle. Hello, Newcastle.
Anybody there? I remember my auntie was there. I remember her coming back and telling us all about it, but I think he redeemed himself when he appeared on extras, but until then I thought he was a bit of a tit.
Well, there's a thing in Bob Murray's book, isn't it, where he said, I think he said he tried to talk to him, but
no, that's right.
He wasn't having it or something, or he didn't speak to him or something like that, and he'd kind of arranged it and all this. And didn't he say something about the weather at the start, and then it started chucking it down?
Yeah. Yeah. It's always interesting. Again, we've talked about Bob Murray's recollections of things before. I'm surprised he wasn't up on the stage doing a duet.
He was playing drums.
Well, it wasn't Mick Jagger, it turns out. It was Bob Murray. 1953, on the 23rd of June as well, is another big date in Sunderland history, because Billy Elliott, who we've talked about Billy Elliott a few times, he's cropped up as a player and caretaker manager, but he arrived at the club from Burnley for 26 grand apparently. And in 1999, only 2 years after moving to the Stadium of Light, we actually went to the council to increase the capacity. the extension for the north end, so that bumped the capacity. I think it was 42,000, wasn't it, originally, and then we bumped it up by another 6 or so.
Yeah.
In 2016, on
that quickly, Martin. I remember because I had season tickets from when it first started, and I was in the upper part of the north stand. So because we used to go on the full end in Roker Park, so we picked our tickets, tried to pick it almost where we would have been at Roker Park, and so we were in that north stand, and then it was like obviously a year or two later, we were getting pissed off for like 4 months. We were absolutely soaking wet. There was some games where it was like we were looking outside, going, "Oh, did we bother just sitting in that and getting absolutely drenched or not?" But actually, I don't think we missed one, but we did have conversations about missing them.
No, it's funny when you look back on video footage of that time when the roof was off, because it looks a different ground at that end, doesn't it?
Mm, yeah, it was. And yeah, I just remember it because I just remember it being a real pain in the backside for ages, and I couldn't wait for it to get done. I mean, more because obviously you wanted the stadium to look nice, but at the same time, having a season ticket, and they didn't reduce the price, by the way. They knew they were taking the roof off, and we should have had, when I'm sure the Roker end was always cheaper, wasn't it, at Roker Park, because it was, in the open air and wasn't. You paid more for the full end to have a roof, but not at the stadium. Like, I paid exactly the bloody same.
They should have given you a poncho or something, shouldn't they?
Well, it's funny because we used to actually go prepared. We used to actually take them along. And in the end, you ended up kind of, having a few drinks and losing them every time, and then having to get new ones all the time.
On the 23rd of June as well, in 2016, I don't know if you remember this saga, but Jan Mvia's purchase clause, we allowed that to expire on this day. So we think we had so much time at the end of that season to activate that clause, and we decided not to. And then we went and spent what was up until recently a club record fee on Didier Ndong, who I think, I don't think you'd find anybody who would suggest that was a good deal, really. MV was still, he played for West Brom last season. Was it last season or the season before he played for West Brom? Because he came back to English football, didn't he?
And actually, if you listen to Tom White's podcast from last week, he was talking about it. And the bizarre thing was, it made absolutely no sense because we decided to say, we'll wait until his contract's up. And I think that was in the January or something like that.
Yeah.
Or it was coming up, and we said we'll wait for that, but we could have gotten him for something like 5 million. But as he said, like as soon as he signs on the dotted line, his value goes up from 5 million to 20 million with just signing his name and getting a long-term contract. It made and then by the time we're adrift by January, and all deals are off by that point. But it made absolutely no sense at all.
Well, he was sat in London, wasn't he, sending bloody Instagram messages?
But even from a financial point of view, from a football, every angle you bring it in at, it doesn't make sense just to get him to sign. Even if you didn't rate him that much, you could probably sell him for 15, 20 million or something.
Well, that's right.
Or even if you sell him on the cheap, you've doubled your money for 10 million. It just made no sense.
Yeah. And on the 24th of June, so the next day, but back in 1995, Chris Waddle, this was a little bit of an ongoing transfer saga as well. Peter Reid had kept us up, and he was trying to build a team to tackle the championship to go up into the top flight. And Chris Waddle had been kind of permanently linked for a few weeks. And I remember being really excited. I was convinced it was going to happen. And Waddle was allegedly going to come, because I think we got Bracewell in that summer as well, and Waddle was allegedly going to come in. He was only 34. If he'd signed that season, that would have been absolutely first class. But on the 24th of June in 95, he turned Peter Reid down, apparently.
Well, the interesting thing was Keegan was desperate to get him in at Newcastle, wasn't he?
He was. But a boyhood Sunderland fan, and of course we got to see him play a little bit late, didn't we? But
give it to Waddler.
Good tactic.
Yep.
25th of June, I think we had a quiz question at the end of last week's episode. Now, I wasn't on this episode. I was stuck doing some work stuff. And I'm saving this episode for a long journey I'm making because I heard it was a bit of an epic. So I'm saving that one. That's backlogged on my podcast feed. So I got no clue about this. So I'm looking forward to this quiz, Andrew.
Yeah, well, Chris struggled with it, to be fair. So that's at least two of you on this who might not know this player. Have you done a bit of research this week, Chris, or are you still flummoxed by it?
with the bends and everything else, I haven't got a time to go to the Lewin piece, mate. Never mind do some research on this quiz. Sorry, mate.
Fair dues. That's. I feel your pain on that one. Yeah, as Martin says, it was the 25th of June, 1969, that we sold this player. He was a real prospect, so I think when he sold, it was a bit of a sore one to take. He'd been born in Washington in 1948, and he had captained the team when we first won the FA Youth Cup. So, like I say, bit of a prospect. He did very well for the first team, and I'm assuming, Kelvin, you will have seen this player.
Yeah,
Yeah?
I saw him play for the youth team. Followed him through from youth team games to first team. And when you say we sold him, I can still remember the day. I heard about that. Oh my goodness, what we're playing at.
Do you want to do the honours, Kelvin, and give him a name check, or is that? Because if you get it wrong now after that little build-up, we're going to look.
Hopefully, after that build-up, hopefully I've got the right one. It's Collins. Is it Colin Suggett?
Correct. Top marks. Well done.
Because Colin Suggett had some links with Newcastle. He was caretaker manager in Newcastle in the 80s, wasn't
he? He played for them, didn't he, Kelvin?
He signed for them after Norwich. I tracked this lad's career after he left us. I think I've said that before. It's hard to leave some of them guys that you lose alone, and I tracked him all the way through his career, and he landed at Newcastle after Norwich, but he only played about 20-odd games. He took a really bad ankle ligament injury, if memory serves me well, and he ended up youth team coaching for them, and then being in the coaching setup with Newcastle for a good while. I think, I'm going to say it to you, early to mid 90s in the Newcastle coaching setup, and then away. Next time we see him, he's scouting for Portsmouth and people like that, and then Ipswich. He gets in the coaching setup there. But this lad was a great player. How the hell we let him go, and why we let him go, I do not know. He was a fine player, so he was a good goal scorer as well, and he played, with him and Toto played in the same Chesterley Street boys team, and I didn't see this game, but apparently there was about 22,000 people turned up at Roker Park to see Chesterley Street boys playing in the schools cup final, and there was another lad on the pitch as well in that team. I mean, they had a canny team like Toto and Suggett, and Howard Kendall was in the same team. Right. He was one of the older lads in the team. So this lad, he was been on the radar for ages before he got to Sunderland. But Alan Brown's scouting network picked him up. Brownie had reorganised sorry, I've jumped in there, Andrew, a bit on that. Brownie's scouting network picked him up and got him in with Toto, with Colin Todd. I think he was one of Charlie Ferguson's pickups and got him in. So in 64, 65, he's playing, and guess who his youth team coach is? 1964, Cloughie. Yeah. Oh. So he plays with Cloughie. He has just a season with Cloughie. Him and Clough, and a legend of a coach called Bill Scott, coaching the youth team, and he has a season with him. Great player, fine player. Once he got into the team, he played 2 seasons in the first division as a young lad, and he scored. He was our top goal scorer the first season he played. I'm sure he was 15 goals. I think he scored, if I remember rightly, and he scored again the next season. He didn't score as many, but he was our first mark slayer. He scored in every game he played against Newcastle.
Maybe why I signed him.
He was a great player. What a time that was, though, the mid-60s for young players coming through. It's great now I mean, that's why I so enjoy what's happening now with young players. Was when I first started going, we were in this purple patch of young players coming through, and I would say to you that I still say that pound for pound, Colin Todd was the best for my money, but Colin Suggett wasn't far behind him. Like he was a great player. He was going to be a great player.
Just quickly, Kelvin, because you've wrote a lot about that FA youth winning side, haven't you?
I have. Yes, I'm going to do an Andrew here and say, don't be asking me questions on stuff that I've written, mind.
But it was amazing that that sometimes there's a flash in the pan, but a lot of that youth side went on to do good things.
Well, not just in the. I mean, I'm doing all this from memory. I think 64, 65 semi-finals of the Youth Cup. 65, 66, we got the final. Suggett was in that team. He was captain of the team. He was top scorer. Big crowd turned up to watch the two-legged final, and I was at that game. I got taken to that game. I remember it. I remember being there. I don't remember too much about the game. I was still a bit young then. 60, 65, 66, we get to the final and beat Birmingham in a two-legged final, and Suggett's playing in that one, along with Todd. I mean, there was some great, some recognisable players, Bobby Kerr, Billy Hughes, Derek Forster, John O'Hare in that first team. I always really liked John O'Hare. He was another lad, of course, that was sold for buttons. Gave him away, and he was a cracking player, John O'Hare. Desperately disappointing to sell them boys.
Did John O'Hare go team back up with Brian Clough?
Yeah.
Did he? Was it Clough that signed him, maybe, or later on in his career?
Yeah. He picked them up for a song. I think I'm going to say it. He had 20 grand.
Well, he was part of the Colin Todd deal as well. That was them two at the same time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Ah, right.
It was ridiculous. We were given. Yeah. I mean, Toddo went for big money. Suggett went for big money. It was the 100,000. I think he went for. It was big money, but what did we do with it? What was, you couldn't figure out what the thinking was behind it, and it wasn't like we had somebody. It wouldn't be so bad if there was sort of a bit of succession planning going on. The blooming wasn't. I think they got offered the money and took it, and off he went. He was playing it wasn't a particular, the team. At the time, I always felt we were a couple of signings away from being a good team, but dreadfully disappointing to see him go. And he came back to haunt with the first game he played against, where after going to West Brom, he scored in 4 minutes at Roker Park. I was at that game. I was like, you just knew he was. Don't all our ex-players come back and score against with? Aye. Oh, God. What was that? A 2s each draw or something, I think. And he scored within 4 minutes. Nightmare.
Well, there's a really nice seamless link here, because on this day again, so the 25th of June in 1967, a Sunderland team playing under the guise of Vancouver Royal Canadians, featuring Colin Suggett and other people like we've mentioned there, Colin Todd, George Mulhall, Neil Martin, John O'Hare, Jim Baxter, Jimmy Montgomery, drew 2-2 with another team called Toronto City. Now, they were playing in disguise as well. They weren't really Toronto City. Do you know who they were?
Was it Stoke City?
It was Hibs.
Oh, right.
So
yeah.
we played. This whole tour is actually worthy of a podcast in itself, I think. This is one that we should do one day, because it's really, really interesting. But yeah, played out in Toronto, Hibernian 2, Sunderland 2, or Vancouver Royal Canadians 2, Toronto City 2, if you prefer that. Colin Todd actually got sent off on 82 minutes. We were 2-0 up, Alan Gowden and George Mulhall, and we got pulled back by Colin Steen and a Joe Davis penalty
Whoosh.
on 79 minutes. So that was all part of a big tour over there. We went over and played as Vancouver Royal Canadians, which is again a really interesting subject to delve into, but not today.
Hey Martin, if you do delve into that, you'll need a blooming lawyer to be sitting in as well.
Gav,
So
you mean Gav?
just very quickly, because I wrote about that as well. Can you guess who Los Angeles Wolves were? Wolverhampton Wanderers. There was some imagination used in these names, wasn't there?
Well, I quite like Vancouver Royal Canadians. I think that's sounds pretty important, doesn't it?
yeah.
But on June the 25th, 7 years earlier than that game, so we're talking 1960 now, Sunderland legend passed away age 68. And after retiring from football, this guy was a absolute great of the early game, wasn't he? After retiring, he obviously moved into journalism and founded the Football Monthly magazine, which he ran himself. And I've actually got this, again, this is brilliant for an audio platform, but I've actually got this book here with all of the articles from between 1951 and 1973 related to Sunderland in this great book. But Chris, this is somebody who certainly he probably deserves his own podcast as well, but we'll give him 20 or 30 minutes, won't we?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's again, we come across all these names, and as Sunderland fans, you've heard of all these names. And I keep saying to Kelvin sometimes that, when he's talked about players that he's seen, I mean, obviously, let's just for the record, Kelvin didn't see Charlie Buchan play, by the way, just for the record. But when I'm listening to Kelvin talk about the greats, like, talk about Dave Watson and Cecil Irwin and people like that, it's amazing when you get into them and you actually read about their career and read about them, because until then, they're just a name, they're just a footnote, and they're just in the records. And Charlie Buchan, he's only second behind Bobby Gurney on the goal scoring lists, and this, with those great names of that era, because, it's funny because they overlap each other. You look at the kind of top four, and you've got Bobby Gurney, Charlie Buchan, Dave Halliday, and George Holley, and it's almost like Bobby Gurney and Dave Halliday took over from Charlie Buchan and George Holley. So they're all in the top four, and it's just interesting to read. But yeah, Charlie Buchan, he started. It's funny because little details like this. He was a Londoner, which it's again just something I didn't know about the fella. I didn't realize. I knew he had that link with Arsenal, or Arsenal Woolwich as it was, and I didn't realize he was from London. And just little details that actually he'd actually moved there from Aberdeen. And because his dad moved to London to be a blacksmith, so he'd actually moved to London rather than being raised there. And so it was early on. I think he was 17, and he started out at Arsenal, and then he was asked to play for the reserves as a young lad, and he was asked to train a couple of times a week as a young'un, and obviously then money was tight, and Arsenal sent him a bill of 11 shillings for his travel costs to play for the reserves, and the club kind of refused to pay for him, and then he just refused to play for them, even though he was this young lad coming through. And he ended up playing in the Southern League. He went to Leighton, and he was getting paid a few quid a week, but also he was trying to qualify to be a teacher at the same time. And then it turned out he was banging in the goals in the Southern League, so the big clubs started to come in from him, and they turned down offers, an £800 offer from Chelsea. And it took us in early 1911, he was 20 years old by this point, and he ended up going for 1,200, which actually beat the £1,000 record, which was paid by Middlesbrough for Alf Common in 1905. So we were kind of shelling out the cash for this kid who'd Arsenal had just kind of let go and was playing in the Southern Leagues. But again, I mean, Martin's talked about his book, but he had a lifetime in football was his book in 1955, and quite often you see excerpts from that. And on this, he said he came up and he said throughout the weekend they visited, meaning Sunderland, they visited Leighton Ground and my home at Woolwich. I told them all to interview my father, who put some of them off with the news that I would not leave home. The size of the transfer fee asked by Leighton put others off. Then on the Tuesday, I went to the Leighton ground. Manager Dave Buchanan told me I was wanted in the office, and Bob Kyle, Sunderland manager, was waiting there. When I went in, he said, "How would you like to play for Sunderland in the First Division? You'll get maximum wages and a £10 signing on fee." He said, "To be perfectly frank, I did not know exactly where Sunderland was. I knew it was on the northeast coast somewhere near Newcastle, but that was all. It seemed very far away from home." After talking the matter over, Kyle said, "You know, you'll never get a better chance. I can promise you a place in the first team for the rest of the season at least." He said, "That settled the argument. I signed, received the £10 fee, and went in the dressing room to prepare for training. When Dave Buchanan heard I had signed, he was the most disappointed man I'd met. He wanted me to go to Everton. The Sunderland manager came into the dressing room a minute or two afterwards and said, 'Son, it's very cold up north, so I advise you to get an outfit of thick winter clothes. You'll need them.' He said, I did. I bought a new lined coat, £4.04, a tweed suit, £2.10. In fact, a completely new outfit of what I thought would keep me warm in any climate. And the whole lot did not amount to the £10 signing on fee. Today, that would cost me £100. But within 6 months, they were no use to me, whatever. I had grown right out of them." So that was kind of him kind of getting off and starting kind of his move up north. But it's interesting because, again, you just see this big name, but it didn't start off great. It said, when you read, and in his words, he was getting the bird from the Sunderland crowd early on. And he actually asked Bob Kyle to drop him. He said, I don't want to play. He went, "Can you take me out of the side?" And again, in his words, he said, "The crowd began to barrack me, and I must admit, I deserved it. I asked to be dropped from the side, but the manager wouldn't listen. And finally, after one game in mid-November, when the crowd had, with every reason, been noisily expressive about my play, I stormed into the dressing room and declared in a loud voice, 'I'll never kick another ball for Sunderland.'" So this was in the November of the same year when he signed, so it was only kind of 6 months on or so. And he said, "But unfortunately, the local reporter heard me.
Yeah.
In the evening paper, there were bold headlines on my statement. On Monday morning, there were more reports. Though I received hundreds of letters urging me to carry on, I packed my bag and went home to Woolwich. On the following Saturday, Sunderland were to play Woolwich Arsenal at the Manor Field, which was only about half a mile from my home. I did not expect to play. 2 days before the game, manager Kyle came to the house and after a talk with my father, persuaded me to turn out. He said, 'Do your best and show the locals you can do it. And if you fail, we can talk about it afterwards.' He said, 'I played and scored a couple of goals in a 3-1 win for Sunderland, and I felt much better afterwards. I stayed the following week at home and somehow felt a lot stronger. That was the turning point. I returned to Sunderland and began to put on weight. I quickly ran up to 12 stone 8 pounds, my playing weight for the rest of my days, and struck a little form. And no longer did I get the bird from the crowd. They were very kind to me, as they were for 14 and a half years I spent with the club.'" But it's incredible, isn't it? How, 6 months in and it's gone completely wrong. And you think about how many players that Sunderland have had where it's going so wrong. But in this day and age, that's it. You're just kind of out, aren't you?
Well, at that time, you've made such a big move. And, it's hard. When you look back and you see a name like Charlie Buchan, you see all of the stats that he ended up with at the end of his career, you don't really think about the sort of teething troubles at the start. But, big money signing as well, but, very inexperienced and a young player. I think the first season he played 6 games for us and scored once. The season after that, he played a lot. He played 35 games, but he only scored 7 goals. And I think that's probably the season, Chris, that you're talking about there.
Yep.
The season after that, which is 1912-1913 season, he really hits the straps. He plays 45 games, scores 30 goals. We win the league. We obviously get to the FA Cup final, which we've talked about the 1913 Cup final before on these shows. So he really sort of kicks on from there, doesn't he? But it's that, and you right, like in today's football, whether a young lad actually gets that chance, and I think we're actually really good at that at the minute, where you've seen over the last few seasons playing young players through to find the form again, get that confidence, and you don't have to do it all now, just develop and all that sort of stuff. But this is a prime example going back, more than 100 years of the
It's funny you should say that, because my head was playing with the current, the modern day managers that we've had that would have gone down to his house all the way down to London 2 days before the game and spent a bit of time talking to his dad and trying to persuade him to come and play, trying to tease him back into it, I don't see Roy Keane as for instance, doing something like that. But I could see, Chocolate Tony doing something like that,
But you think of the greats though, Kelvin. You think of the likes of Brian Clough. I mean, I remember the story when he went to sign Archie Gemmell. Didn't he? He just said, "Oh well," he stayed there overnight, didn't he, or something? He just said, "Oh well, I'll stay, and you can sign in the morning and stuff like that." And you think of Alex Ferguson with Cantona. He made sure he went to see him and stayed with him for a bit and made sure he was going to come back.
You know what? The big difference is, with those managers that you've just talked about, and with Robert Kyle that we were referring to here with Charlie Buchan, they were long-term managers securing their job, and they were able to spend time doing that. They could do, they could play a player through a bad spell of form, or they could go to 3 or 4 days, 5 days somewhere else trying to sign a player, because they weren't under pressure to get the result on the next game, or as much pressure as people are now. And people's jobs hang by a thread on 3 or 4 games. And it just shows if you've got that time and you've got that, if you're confident in the position that you're holding as a football club, it's the same as any job, isn't it? If you feel confident, you are going to do more of that sort of stuff. If you feel under pressure and you feel as if you could be out the window tomorrow, then you're not going to invest time in those longer term things. So it's another example of that, isn't it?
It's a real sliding door moment with Charlie Buchan, though, isn't it? If he hadn't gone down, if they hadn't been playing Arsenal that weekend,
Again, Kelvin, if he'd said that today, he'd have been texting his agent or sending an Instagram message to his agent saying, "Get us out of here." And by the time he walked out the ground, there would have been a move lined up. And rather than actually letting the dust settle and going, okay, let's sort of recalibrate and let's get back to it. It's that, like, I think in football and social commentary in life, isn't it? A lot of decisions are made instantaneously as a reaction, and all of a sudden they've kind of spread out so far you can't actually pull them back or have time to consider.
Yeah. Well, like you said, he did kind of get going, and like you said, Martin, 7 goals in that first season when he was struggling, but then the next season, I think in all competitions he scores 30 in 45 games, and of course that's the 1912-13 season that we've been talking about. That we won the league and we were so close to the double. And just as a sign of the difference, I mean, the season before, finishing 8th when he struggled, we scored 58 goals in the league. Next season we score 86 goals. When he's banging them in. And just a quick story, because he starts forming a really good partnership with George Holley. And actually in his book, he said he was possibly the best inside kind of forward that he played with in his career. And in another interesting story, I don't want to get too much off topic, but talking about getting close to the double, and we talked about that. And in his book, he also there's a good story in the build up to that cup final against Aston Villa, where actually he says George Holley was basically crocked. I mean, he was injured and there was big news, and then we ended up kind of putting him on the pitch. But I think that was a big story going into that big final. But then, of course, the season after, we slip a bit, 7th and 8th. But then war breaks out, and this is obviously kind of sad in all forms. But he does join the Grenadier Guards, and he is sent to the Western Front, and he does pick up medals while he's out there. He saw action at the Somme and Passchendaele. And just in terms of his stats, because I did a quick, I was scribbling down before I started, and if all I did was, because he missed 4 seasons, so finished in the 14-15 season and picked back up in the 19-20 season. So he missed 4 whole seasons, and I was looking at, and I took his average, even that season where he didn't do quite so well, and it adds, if you just take the average and put them over across that 4 seasons, it adds another 164 appearances, and it adds another 88 goals. And I know it's not an exact science, but that would have put him quite comfortably second behind Jimmy Montgomery on the appearance list. And you could, Charlie Buchan and Bobby Gurney as well, you could put into that with the Second World War, I think. when he played across that. And I think there was a lot of players who were kind of, when you look at their stats, you've got to remember from this era that their careers were broken up, really. And Charlie Buchan was one of them. So that would have put him comfortably second behind Jimmy Montgomery on a total of 575, if you just take the average. And in terms of goals, it would have put him on 310 goals, which would have made him the top scorer. But again, Bobby Gurney's got the same thing, so you'd have to do the same thing with Bobby Gurney. But yeah, it is interesting that, it potentially kind of, for a lot of these people's careers and their lives, I suppose it put a lot of people's lives on hold during that time. Once he returned from the war, he actually returned to his teaching job, Cowan Terrace School. And he actually said in his book that he was finding it difficult to do both of them. He said teaching and playing professional football did not mix. By the time Friday came around, I could hardly talk to the class, so I could not concentrate on both at the same time. So at the end of the 1920 season, he gave up teaching and he opened a sports outfitters business in Blandford Street. And so he had this business at the same time, and he was scoring goals for Sunderland. But after the return of the season, when we returned from the war, we finished 5th. But after that, we started slipping down a little bit into mid-table. And by kind of the 22-23 season, Charlie Buchan was actually the only player left from the team that won the title in 1912-13. But Sunderland did have a better season because Bob Kyle rebuilt that side in 1922-23. We finished second, and then we finished third in 23-24. But then it got to 1925. I'm like you, Martin. I keep saying 2025. It's getting out of that habit. And Herbert Chapman walked into his sports outfitters shop, and he described this in his book. He said, on May 1925, I was serving in my Sunderland shop when the great Herbert Chapman walked in. A few weeks before, he had left Huddersfield Town to take over managership of Arsenal. His first words on seeing me were, "I have come to sign you on for Arsenal." Yes, I replied, thinking he was joking. "Shall we go to the back room and sign the forms?" "I'm serious," was his answer. "I want you to come with me to Highbury." He said, "Have you spoken to Sunderland about it?" I asked, still thinking it was all part of a joke. "Oh, yes," said Mr. Chapman. "If you don't believe me, ring up Bob Kyle and he'll tell you." Still unbelieving, I phoned the Sunderland manager. "Yes," he said, "we've given Arsenal permission to approach you." "Do you want me to go?" I asked him. "We are leaving that to you. Do what you think is best for you. It's in your hands." He said, "Slowly I put down the receiver. I was almost stunned by what I had heard. It had never crossed my mind that Sunderland would be prepared to part with me so easily. Mr. Chapman just said one word, 'Well,' and all I could say in the moment was, 'Give me time to think about it. Come back tomorrow and I will let you know one way or another.'" He said he finally made up his mind, and he said, "I'm going to sign for Arsenal, but I shan't do it until the end of July." So he gave Herbert Chapman his word. And then he said a few weeks later, Sunderland director George Short, he said, he called me at the shop. He said, "What's this about you leaving Sunderland?" He said, when I told him, he replied, "Then I shall resign." He kept his word. It seemed there were sharply divided opinions about my leaving. But the strange thing is that nobody asked me to change my mind. And then he did, in fact, go on to sign for Arsenal. But the deal was a strange one, because Sunderland had asked for, or I think they'd maybe offered 4,000. I can't remember which way around it was. Whether they had offered 4,000. The deal was around 4,000. I can't remember whether Sunderland asked for it or Arsenal had offered it.
I think Sunderland asked for Sunderland asked for £4,000. Arsenal only wanted to pay 2,000.
Yeah, and Arsenal wanted to pay 2,000, but we said that, okay, pay us 2,000 cash down, but you pay £100 for every goal he scores that season. And he scored 21 goals. So we got more than the £4,000 in the end. And he was a clever fella as well, because when he went to Arsenal, there was most teams, when I was reading about it, most teams played the 2-3-5 formation, which we touched on in previous pods. And then they changed the offside rule, which reduced the number of opposition players that an attacker needed between himself and the goal line from 3 to 2. And he actually suggested to Herbert Chapman that they should play a new formation. And he actually came up with this 3-3-4 formation, which ended up being known as the WM formation. And he actually suggested that to Herbert Chapman, and he was like I said, he was a clever fella. And obviously, you know, afterwards he went on. He started writing about football for the Daily Chronicle, and he helped establish the Football Writers Association. And then they had that. Obviously, they introduced the annual Football Writers Footballer of the Year, and the first winner was 1948, was Stanley Matthews, which obviously famously. And then, as Martin said, 1951 he launched the highly successful Charlie Buchan's Football Monthly, and then did his autobiography in 1955, which I've been talking about. But in terms of his death, again, quite an interesting story. He went on holiday to the south of France for the summer holidays in 1960, and he went there most years, and he went to a hotel near a casino, and he only did this. Apparently, he did this most days, where he would drink champagne at 11 o'clock in the morning every day, which he would do. You know, retired football and, you know, just enjoying life. And then he'd go to races in the afternoon, and then after dinner, he would go to the casino. And the story is that on the 25th of June 1960, Charlie Buchan had a considerable win at the casino, which was how it was described. And he'd actually had heart problems previously, so he knew that he did have heart problems. But he ended up passing away through a heart attack on that night. But the strange thing was, I was reading about it, there was a pilot strike, I think it was, they're going on at the time, because they couldn't get his body back. And as he wasn't a Catholic, they couldn't take him to the local chapel. So his body was actually laid to rest in the casino overnight, which is some way to go, isn't it? You talk about Shane Warne. I mean, you know, it's always like, and yeah, so his wife actually went back to the hotel, and mid-morning, she was actually greeted by the sight of her husband's coffin with a bottle of champagne in it, together with a vase of flowers from the casino manager. Apparently, it was the story. Yeah, so remember, his family flew out to try and retrieve the body and bring it back to the UK. But as I said, there was an airstrike at the time, and they couldn't make the return trip. So there was a scorching summer, and Charlie Buchan would have to be cremated. And because obviously a Catholic country at the time, there was only one crematorium in the south of France, which was Marseille. So that was quite a long journey from where they were. And again, it goes on, this story, because a hearse arrived to take the body back to Marseille. But apparently, from what I'm reading, on the way at midday, the hearse pulled into a restaurant car park so the driver could have his lunch. And 2 hours later, the journey continued and things like this. But this crematorium that they turned up to hadn't been used for years, and it was especially opened just for this. And in the end, there was he was cremated, and then there was a memorial service at St Bride's Church in Fleet Street. But yeah, I mean, absolutely fascinating story. And half of this, again, you don't get into the characters. You see statistics and you go, wow, up there on the Sunderland list.
Yeah.
But there's so many details that, you just pick up when you just start getting into it. And again, I mean, in his book, there's so much more in terms of his time on the Western Front, because he really did, he went through it there, and he talked about his memories there and how difficult that was, and coming back from that and kind of getting back into things. So an absolutely incredible story, and obviously kind of forever there on the Sunderland stats as in terms, I think he's obviously second behind Bobby Gurney in the goals, but I think he's something like 8th on the all-time appearances list as well.
Me granddad, he used to tell us about Charlie Buchan, and he always said he was a great man. But me granddad, he was a bit of a kidder, and he used to say to me that he was one of Robin Hood's merry men in the First World War, and he won the Victoria Cross. And I was an adult before I realised what my granddad was telling us. I think he'd been with because I did go and look this up eventually, that kind of jumped into my head one day, and I thought, what was he talking about, my granddad? And went and looked this up, and here he was in the Sherwood Foresters in the First World War. And it wasn't the Victoria Cross, it was the military medal that he won. So a really interesting story that in itself. I am trying not to say something about, imagine the newspaper headline upon the story of his death in the venue, and, Carter has his chips, that would be a bit, some of the papers wouldn't be able to resist that. His football monthlies were brilliant as well. It was great to see Martin waving that book about, because I used to get them, and I sold my collection. I had a collection that went back to 1960. My granddad used to bring us them. They were always well thumbed. He was a forager, my granddad. He never bought them out. He used to just pick it up or get it and bring it to us, because he knew I loved the football, and he bought us all this stuff. And I had a muckle collection of them, and I sold them in 72, 73 to an old boy to fund me FA Cup adventure.
Well, at least it went to a good
cause.
Just really quickly, Kelvin, because you mentioned that time in the Western Front, there was a quote from him shortly before he died, actually. He said, "It was tough, mighty tough, but I know now it did me all the good in the world. I was proud to belong to the Grenadier Guards." So he was clearly proud of what he did on the Western Front.
Yeah.
It's interesting. A lot of these players who went to war both in the First World War and Second World War, they played for a long time. It was almost as if they thought that they'd missed out on, and they had obviously missed out on a chunk of their career, but they kind of wanted to make up that time at the end of the career. I think we've talked there, Charlie Buchan playing until 37 or 38 perhaps for Arsenal. And Rach Carter played a long time after he left Sunderland at 32 or 33, and Bobby Gurney played until maybe 36, 37. And that was unusual. Once he got to the 60s and 70s, players would retire sort of 32, 33 went. So it's quite marked and noticeable when you see the length of some of those players' careers who had that chunk of missed out.
You do wonder though, but actually, obviously, while most of them served, they would have been staying fit and kind of so that would have prolonged their careers. Because actually, but when you look at as you said, the 60s and the 70s, Martin, there was always a fag in their hand, and they were out every other night and all that sort of stuff. So it was a completely different culture, whereas these lads kind of really extended their careers, didn't they?
Some lifestyle issues on both sides, I think.
Was it wage thing as well, perhaps? These lads maybe saw this as, a good way to earn money, because presumably they weren't rolling in cash. I dare say they didn't have savings or anything. So if you're able to play, you keep on doing it.
Well, that's right.
Well, yeah, just on that, Charlie Buchan, again, just having time, because he did so much. I don't want to kind of take up all the time, but he did have a big part to play, because he was on the Players Union Committee, and there was obviously a £10 per week maximum wage at the time, and at the time, like, clubs were trying to reduce it. So as part of the Players Union Committee, he was fighting against it, and kind of he led the charge on that.
Wow. Fascinating.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
I was looking for his autobiography on Amazon, and it's a fortune. You can only buy hard copy. You can't get a soft copy of it. It's not in circulation anymore, and you can't get a digital copy of it. It's hundreds of quid to get a copy of his book.
Wow.
If you'd get the copyright of that and reprint it, you'd probably earn a few quid.
I think it's not.
That sounds like something Charlie Buchan would do.
We'll cut that.
Giving away that little.
Away the podcast, trademark, idea, copyright, etc., etc.
This time next year, gents.
Yeah, lads. What have John Motts and Jim Rosenthal, Nick Owen, Barry Fry, and the writer Sebastian Falks got in common with me?
This isn't on my notes anywhere, Kelvin. Where's this come from?
We all wrote in to the Charlie Buchan Football Monthly.
What was your letter?
Man. I wrote a letter in asking them if they could. I thought I was writing to Jim will fix it or something. I wrote a letter in asking if they could fix up for Jim Baxter and Charlie Hurley. to come and train were school football team. It didn't get published. But their mothers that I named, they all had letters published.
Yeah.
I came across that little nugget a while back when I was looking at what my grandfather used to say to me about them. There you go.
I remember I once wrote to Greavesy. Jimmy Greaves did the letters in Shoot. It was Shoot magazine, wasn't it? And I wrote to him telling him that Marco should be in the England team.
Yeah.
I also wrote to Jim will fix it. I set my sights really low, and it was before.
Oh, yeah.
It was before we knew. It was before.
Look at your escape.
Well, it was. But sorry, let me. This has got nothing to do with football, but it's funny. I wrote Jim will fix it. And I set my sights really low. I asked him to fly me over to America on Concorde to drive Knight Rider. I was 6. Never heard back, which again, in hindsight, is probably a very good thing.
Just to try and swing back to Charlie Buchan for one last thing, because again, there's this writer A. Smithson. He doesn't even know what he writes half the time. I can't remember it, but actually, it just, Andrew, what you wrote, where it was, because you said where his shop was, Charlie Buchan's shop is now the Muller Swiss Bakery. Apparently, what you wrote.
Yes, or it might be that it was next door. So again, don't take what I've written is
all right, okay. Don't say that, bloody hell.
Yeah, but I mean that's crazy, that, because the train station, on a lot of the adverts for Charlie Buchan's shop, it publicised the fact that it was dead close to Sunderland train station. So was it Herbert Chapman? You said travelled up from London, hopped off the train, walked round the corner, gone into the shop, and rather than inquiring about the stock, he says, "Oh, I'll just buy the manager of this store instead."
Yeah. Well, that's when Sunderland would have had a half decent train station, by the way.
Oh,
that's a different story.
Yeah, I think he was a fascinating fella. The shop he ran was in conjunction with a local cricketer who, when Buchan moved on, he continued running a sports shop and had supplied a lot of kits to Sunderland in the 30s. A lot of the famous photos you see of the team winning the championship, winning the FA Cup, they've all been provided and supplied by Buchan's business partner. So again, just another little link back to the club.
Well, I think he also played cricket for Durham.
Oh, did he? Right. One
you wrote this, by the way, Andrew.
Did I?
You wrote that.
Oh,
yeah.
Joking.
You said he was a good golfer as well.
Oh, crikey. What we should do? We should introduce a new true and false section.
Yeah.
Did Andrew write this?
We dig up one of well, not even that. We dig up one of Andrew's articles from the past and ask him a few true or false stats about it.
This next thing I was going to touch on, it may have been me that wrote this. I really loved the story when he was actually sold. There was a school teacher appeared in one of the papers. He might have even been one of Buchan's former colleagues on the teaching profession. He reported that the children were so upset that the day was a write-off. Literally, lessons there was no point trying to talk to the boys in the class because they'd heard that Buchan was being sold. He was the big favourite. And it was just a case of, right, we're not going to get anything out of these kids today. We'll just write the day off.
And maybe just to finish it, I mean, there's one thing, just to emphasise your point as well. You also wrote that he was not only involved in the Football Writers Association, but the Association of Golf Writers.
Yes.
Again, that came from you.
Yes.
But again, let's footnote this, because obviously you've just said this, Andrew, about him leaving. But look, he was because that was 1925. He was essentially replaced by Bobby Gurney and Dave Halliday, which isn't a bad partnership to be replaced with, is it?
No, and as Kelvin said earlier on, a very good sort of succession line. There was some planning involved somewhere along the line there, I suspect, wasn't there? Which, and again, if you're looking at it from a footballing point of view, when Arsenal approached Bob Kyle and he said to Charlie Buchan, it's up to you. You make a call whether you want to go or not. In one hand, he's probably trying to do the right thing for a player who'd served the club for a long time. And also, he knew there was players coming through and around the club and who would bring in that would fill the void and maybe deserved a chance. So there's that aspect to that move as well.
How's this for a James Bond story? Like Chris, like you've all said, actually, there's so many fascinating little strands to his career. When he was in Brazil in 1950, covering the World Cup, once he was, then in journalism, he was apparently in a hotel room and thieves sprayed the room with drugs, meaning that he passed out and they were able to go into his room and swipe all of his personal belongings. Apparently there was a lot of journalists got caught out with this trick. I mean, that is next level stuff. This isn't just like being subject to a pickpocket. These English journalists were over in Brazil. People presumably thought, they might have a bit of money about them. So we're going to find out what rooms they're going to stay in. And we're going to I don't know what drug it was, but it was something that knocked the guests to these rooms out so they could just slip in and take all their valuables. I mean...
I think we can make our own assumptions about that, can't we?
Or do you think that was maybe a bit of an excuse?
Well, no, I suspect. I think it might have been, maybe a couple of different people coming into the rooms. One coaxes them in, sprays something, knocks them out. Some other people come in, who
possibly. But for somebody who then needed to be laid to rest
involved.
Yeah, again. But for somebody who needed to be laid to rest in a casino, I think that's just another intriguing little tale.
What a colourful life! A colourful life.
See, this book will be worth a few hundred quid. Won't it be worth buying for a few hundred quid? Sounds like a good investment.
Yeah. And of course, he was an England international as well. Scored 4 goals in 6 games for England along the way.
That's boring. That's boring in comparison to everything else.
It is, but yeah, he did get national recognition.
Not bad.
But yeah, I mean, like I said, you just see numbers on a page until you start getting into it. But what a life he led.
And interestingly, we'll just to wrap that one up, is caps for England came over a 10-year period, so he played 6 games in 10 years, and his first goal and his last goal, his 4th goal, were over a 10-year period as well. So there must be some sort of record there in terms of the fewest caps over the longest period of time or something like that. Because, and again, if we go up to another England international Sunderland forward, 4 years before... Not 4 years. Before 4 years after Charlie Buchan's incident in Brazil in the hotel room and getting drugged. 1954 World Cup. A former Sunderland forward, Ivor Broadus, was an England team that lost 4-2 to Uruguay. This was a World Cup quarter-final game in Bâle. I always liked Ivor Broadus because he was a player-manager of Carlisle at a young age and he sold himself to Sunderland, which is, again, not many people can have sold themselves, I don't think, as a player-manager.
No conflict of interest at all, is there?
Not in the slightest. Is it a good deal? We'll take it. That was on June 26th, and also June 26th, 1957, was the day that Bill Murray stood down from his post as manager of the club after the inquiry into illegal player payments, which, again, we've kind of touched upon that whole saga a little bit, and I guess that's probably a subject for a whole, again, we'll get racking up these individual podcasts on periods in Sunderland history, aren't we? Because that's a whole episode that could certainly do
we need to get Mr. Smith on the pod.
Find Mr. Smith. That can be the big reveal at the end, can't it? Who is Mr. Smith?
I would tune in for that one, like.
June the 27th, 1967, Sandy McLaughlin was transferred to Kilmarnock, Sunderland goalkeeper, £2,500. June 27th, 1990, and this is always one of those intriguing sliding doors moments again. We were trying to sign John Byrne. So this was the season that we just gone up. We talked a couple of weeks ago about the sort of delayed promotion through the courtrooms after the Swindon debacle. Eric Yates had gone to Carlisle. we were looking to sign a new strike partner for Marco, and John Byrne was somebody who Dennis Smith had already tried to bring into the club, I think twice at least, before this point. We tried to sign John Byrne to partner Marco in top flight. Moves didn't come off. We signed Peter Davenport. But John Byrne was a player I loved when he arrived, well, a year later. And if he'd been signed, because he got brought in eventually to replace Marco, didn't he? But that's always one of those where you think if him and Marco had played together, that would have been a pretty good partnership, I think. 2001, we did sign a French international striker for 3.5 million, who was intended to replace Niall Quinn. And obviously that didn't really work out the way that Peter Reid intended, but that was Lillian Lasland, in my best French accent. Actually, I saw something on social media only this afternoon, maybe, and somebody was in the Bordeaux club shop and they had a big mural up about the greatest players in Bordeaux history, and Lasland was there as the best, because I think he went back to Bordeaux after he left us at some point, but he's highly regarded. They're far more highly regarded than he is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I did see him score for us, though. I did see him score for us at Sheffield.
You got the T-shirt.
I John said what?
Just quickly, I always, it's interesting, the story in Bob Murray's book about talking to Bobby Saxon at the races, I think. And Bobby Saxon's telling Bob Murray that this French lad's no good. He's just spent $3.5 million on him. But that was kind of when it started going downhill, wasn't it?
It certainly was. Well, it was a few of them, wasn't there, who brought in and very quickly realised for one reason or another that they weren't quite up to scratch. 2004, Steve Caldwell joined Sunderland from Newcastle on a free transfer. And 2018 was a glorious day in Sunderland history on June the 27th. Anybody know why that was such a good day?
2018?
June 27th, 2018.
Was that the... I was going to say this, not that it wasn't the Celtic pre-season. Was that when the takeover happened?
No. Jack Rodwell's contract was cancelled.
Oh,
so there you go. Memento.
Should be etched in our memories, that one.
There should be a blue plaque of where it actually happened.
Well, it should be, shouldn't it? You can go alongside Darren Gibson's. June 28th, 2011, we agreed a £13 million fee, apparently, for Connor Wickham. It's a hell of a lot of money for Connor Wickham, and it's a hell of a lot of money for almost 15 years ago. And on this day, so the 28th of June in 1993, a former Sunderland player arrived back at Roker Park to assist Terry Butcher as our manager, Andrew.
Yes, that's right. Ian Atkins, who at the time, I was still quite young. I didn't know a lot about him, to be fair, but it turns out that previously, in the earlier decade, he was a pretty handy player for us. Not so much as an assistant manager. It didn't quite work out, but yes, good player for us. And when he was appointed, as you say, there was a big press conference on the 28th of June, Martin. It was seen as a bit of a scalp to get him in. The season before, as you say, Terry Butcher was manager. He'd taken over from Malcolm Crosby and inherited as his assistant Bobby Ferguson. Although, as Chris quite rightly pointed out to me a couple of days ago when we were having a chat, I think a few people wondered about that. Like it was Bobby Ferguson that brought Terry Butcher into contact with Crosby, and there's been an uneasy feeling since there, hasn't there, that maybe Ferguson knew what was happening, and if he got Butcher to come along as a player, he'd be in pole position to take over as manager should anything happen with Crosby. Well, Butcher and Ferguson haven't.
Yeah, you already kind of tried at Coventry and failed, so he wanted another crack at it, didn't
he? Yeah. Butcher and Ferguson had been together at Ipswich, and as you say, Butcher had a stint as player manager before, so there was a bit of an uneasy feeling about that. But Ferguson himself, by the end of 92-93, had made himself pretty unpopular anyway. He'd made a couple of comments which had angered the fans. There was a load of letters in the Sports Echo towards the end of the season, kind of criticising Ferguson for his attitudes. So he ended up leaving, and that left a gap. That was the space that Butcher filled by bringing Atkins in. Now, Ferguson, Kelvin, do you know a place in Northumberland called Dudley? How big's that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ferguson was yet another Sunderland employee who was originally from Northumberland. Seemingly was born in Dudley. Although, as I say that, I thought Dudley was a lot further south, so maybe it must be a smaller version, is it?
It is, yeah. It's sandwiched. I'm just struggling to think exactly where it is. Yeah.
Well,
just very quickly, Andrew, in Terry Butcher's book, he talks about Bobby Ferguson leaving, and the reason he gave Terry Butcher apparently was that he thought the squad had no chance. He basically just went, "The crap, I want out."
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it suited all parties when he went, certainly, because, Ferguson wasn't particularly enthralled with the squad he was working with. The fans weren't exactly pleased with him either. So, although he maybe had it in his mind that he'd be a long-term assistant to Butcher, that didn't happen. He was peddled, or he chose to go. Like you say, Chris, he maybe looked at the squad and thought, I don't fancy working with this lot. So he left. That sparked a bit of a reshuffle behind the scenes. And come the 28th of June, there's this press conference where it's confirmed that Jim Montgomery's coming back to the club to succeed Jim Morrow as youth development officer. But the big one is the fact that Atkins is the new assistant manager. Butcher was thrilled to have Atkins in, seemingly. Atkins had been manager at Cambridge United the previous season, and I think they were relegated perhaps, but it was one of those where the blame wasn't on Atkins. There was a lot of things going on behind the scenes, so he left the club without any kind of bad mark against his name. So he was still a young coach with a good reputation. Butcher was thrilled to get him in. Atkins, for his part, said he did have some of his own ideas about how they were going to work together. He saw them very much as bouncing ideas from one to another. So he saw himself as being quite a senior partner in this little duo. Butcher, meanwhile, he was looking to spend a lot of money that summer. Atkins, again, I think he'd been primed about that, because when he's had his word in the press conference, he said that they'll be discussing players as a team and seeing who comes in. So he saw himself as being there for the long run. Butcher certainly was planning ahead. He saw himself as having a successful reign at Sunderland. He's talking in this press conference about how they've got a couple of years together, but that he wanted to get things done there and then. He was predicting Sunderland to have a good season, which, as we all know, didn't pan out. This assistant manager, Atkins, was thinking he was going to be in it for the long haul, and he only manages to get to November. So what's that? Well, that's June to November, is it, Chris?
Yeah, well, just quickly as well, in that summer, the other big part of that reshuffle was the reserve team manager. I don't know if you remember, because Mick Buxton. And Bob Murray was a big fan of Mick Buxton. He liked him a lot when he was at Huddersfield. He thought he did a cracking job at Huddersfield. And actually, sure, I'm sure he mentions him in his book, that he's always watching him. He knew that, he kind of knew how well he'd done, but he's always watching him along the way. And actually, it's funny because as you said, with the Malcolm Crosby thing, it wasn't his choice to really appoint Malcolm Crosby. He wanted Neil Warnock, couldn't get Neil Warnock. And then Terry Butcher's almost this default, because he was doing that thing with the fans at the end of every game, and Sunderland fans were reacting to it. And I think he just thought, oh, well, I've got my chance now. I'm going to sack Crosby. Terry Butcher's there, and he's been a manager, so I'm just going to get him in. So it's almost like these last couple of appointments hadn't been his choice. And in that summer, I think he was wary of Butcher a little bit, even though he, as he said, we'll go into how much money he spent. But he brought in Mick Buxton, and I always think that actually in the back of his mind, Bob Murray thought, I'm going to bring Mick Buxton on, because Terry Butcher actually says Mick Buxton was nothing to do with him. He said it wasn't his appointment. And I always think Bob Murray was planning the next step.
I think he probably was at that stage, because that period of time with Butcher in charge from whenever it was until the end of the season, it was like February or something, wasn't it, until the end of the season, had gone disastrously wrong. But I think I'm going to give Bob Murray a little bit of leeway here, because down the road at Newcastle, a former England captain was working wonders. And I think he saw, you've got to remember, Terry Butcher was still playing for Rangers regularly. It was a year after Italia 90. And Leeds, who were the champions of the league, wanted to sign Butcher to play centre-half from Rangers, 31-year-old.
Yeah, but that's Howard Wilkinson.
Well, hey, look, once again, I'll give Howard Wilkinson a bit of rope here, because he just won the league with Leeds United. So regardless of anything else, you had this, top club or top team in the country wanting Butcher to come and play centre back for them. He gets the other offer from Coventry. He goes player manager, and Coventry pay, I think, 400 or 500 grand to Rangers to bring him back to English football. He goes in Coventry as player manager. It doesn't quite work out for him, but it's not a complete disaster. He brought Don Harway in as his assistant at Coventry, and I think Coventry thought, in the short term, Don Harway was going to be a better bet to keep us up in the top flight than Butcher was. So he got sacked, I think, in January or February. And then we brought him in as a player that summer after the FA Cup final. And again, you're talking about somebody who's 32, 30, maybe 33 or 34 at that point. And as a player, I thought he was really good for us. I thought his legs had gone, but you could tell he was a smart football player.
Yeah, you could tell his mind still had it, but I always remember the Julian Georgium at Filbert Street.
Yeah.
Where Julian Georgium had about 30 yards on him.
Oh, well, look, he was never the fastest as a centre-back, but he'd lost all of his pace. But the point I'm getting to here, right, is that when we got rid of Crosby, he thought, there's a ready-made person here, ex-England captain, he's got a bit of managerial experience, he's got an aura and a presence about him. And I think it's dead easy in hindsight to go, look, he was crap as a manager, and he hasn't had a successful career as a manager subsequently. But at that point, it was a smart decision.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I do think he was backing him, because he gave him money in the summer that he'd never given to any other manager. So
to bring this whole thing back around to Ian Atkins is coming in here, and Butcher had come in, say in February, inherited the staff that Crosby had, and Bobby Ferguson's role in that you can put two and two together and probably get the correct answer. But he's kind of had a clean sweep of the backroom staff. So Atkins is coming in here, and Atkins is only 34, maybe, or 35. Bit of managerial experience as well. And, he's come back into a club he knows. And it all looked as if it was we were actually doing things properly for once. We bring in Monty again, as you say, appoint a proper reserve manager. We've signed, Phil Gray and Andy Melville and Alex Chamberlain and Derek Ferguson and Ian Rogerson that summer as well. And it felt as if we were kind of doing things properly. And I think that was probably an impact of what was going on up the road as well.
It made sense, as you say, particularly in light of what was happening elsewhere. Also interesting to note at this period, touching perhaps on what Chris had suggested, that was the summer when Butcher stopped being player manager and he just reverted to manager. Obviously, Chris has nightmares about Georgium tearing past him. I wonder if Butcher himself looked at that and thought, hang on, now's my time to concentrate on managing.
No, it's quite possible. There was one, it was his first game as manager, and it was at Swindon at home. Yeah. And we got beat 1-0 and we missed 2 pens. But Butcher should have been sent off because he wiped somebody out and going clean through at the full well end, I think. Yeah. Professional foul.
And one of those penalties was the last kick of the game. I think Bowley in the last minute.
Bowley, Gordon Armstrong won the both. Yeah. Both in this penalty.
But because what was going on as well that summer, because we had a massive squad at the time, and basically he was given some money, but he had to trim that squad back, and he transfer listed 5, 6, 7 players like at the start of the season, and then as he described in his book, he said nobody offered anything for them, so he told all these players he could leave, and nobody. But he transfer listed, but Gary Hours, Gordon Armstrong, players who'd been there for years.
He wanted to get rid of them, didn't he? And nobody wanted them or wanted to go, which obviously caused its own problems in the dressing room subsequently, didn't it?
You're right, gents. He alienated a lot of players, and I think there was a bit of a feeling when he did go in November '93. I think a lot of players kind of might have had a wry smile on their face at that one, at the way he went. You mentioned when Buxton was brought in, perhaps without his say-so. I remember Butcher was very bitter about Buxton. Now, there's a sentence it's hard to say. He was very bitter about the way Buxton took over from him. And yet you think, well, fair's fair, because you'd manoeuvred yourself into a place allegedly with Ferguson to come on to take over from Crosby. So it's kind of, it goes around in circles.
And the details as well, Martin Crosby told us that apparently Butcher told him, he's like, it's like, sorry to hear that, Gaffer, and all this. I'll give you a ring, or we'll come and see you, or something like that. And he said he never heard from him again. And then in his book, he said about Buxton, Buxton said, I'll give you a ring later, and never rang him. So it's like,
there you go. You can't really be too surprised that that's how football works. As I say, though, there were all these plans, and we all thought this is a good way to go. And yet by November 1993, Butcher goes, Atkins is given the bullet with him. So he's only at Roker for a few months. At the time, as I say, I didn't really know much about Atkins. Either side of him, you had assistants in Viv Busby and Bobby Saxton, who were very vocal. Everybody knew who they were. They were in the press a lot. Atkins, I don't really feel had that present.
You're missing one out there. You're missing Mick Buxton's number 2, Trevor Hartley.
Oh, well, yes. Trevor Hartley, again, was a darling of the media. He was...
all the ex-players say, God, there were a couple of dour fellas then.
Yeah.
But mind, a lot of the players said Mick Buxton was ahead of his time in terms of how he did the opposition prep.
I think that's fair. And maybe that was what Murray had spotted in him. This coaching side was excellent. He maybe didn't have the charisma you needed. Atkins, as I say, you didn't hear much from him as an assistant manager, did you, Kelvin?
Well, Mick Buxton's stats bear some looking at. I always jump to the defence of Mick Buxton. It was doer football, but he did make were hard to beat. And we were losing games week on week. I hated the Terry Butcher. I hated the football that we played. But I tell you, Ian Atkins was a very good player when he came to us, and a leader on the pitch. So I wasn't surprised to see him move into management for sure.
I was going to ask you, Kelvin, because he came from Shrewsbury, and when you look back and read about him earlier in his career, he seemed to be a midfielder or an attacking player.
Yeah,
and he had a good goal scoring record. He had 1 in 4 goal scoring record pretty much for Shrewsbury. We bought him, I think, for 80 grand plus Alan Brown, and he brought him into the club. And then a couple of years later, we sold him to Everton for 70 grand by himself. So it seems kind of interesting. In terms, one, I'm interested to hear your recollections of his playing style, because you look back on him as a defender, but you seem to have a reputation earlier in his career as more of an attacking player. Then I'm interested to know what you know about the transfer fee going to Everton, because it seems low.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was about 30. There's the Alan Brown factor. There's Alan Brown to factor in there. I thought we paid 30 grand for him plus Alan Brown, but that's just my memory. I wouldn't sort of bet a month's wages on total, right?
Maybe.
He was almost elegant on the ball. He could play. He was a footballer.
I'm pleased you said that, Kelvin, because that was going to be my last point. Martin mentioned when he came to Sunderland, he was in his mid-30s. He was still quite young. I wondered, because of the fact he was a leader on the pitch, he was a talker, he was an elegant footballer, would he have perhaps been better served being brought in as a player coach rather than assistant manager, Kelvin? Do you think he could have helped on the pitch, particularly now that Butcher himself was no longer playing.
Mm. Mm. It's hard to say. I don't think we had the information then about what was happening behind the scenes that we have these days, and I think he's hitched his coat to Butcher, he's swung his hat on to Butcher, and when Butcher goes, he goes. He was him, and my recollection of that, I think it was Alan Durbin brought him in, and my recollection of that was that him and Paul Bracewell were really, really tight. The two of them were really got to become really good buddies on the pitch, in the dressing room, and I think they left together. I think, did they not both go back to Everton?
Both went to Everton at the same time, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Another assistant manager as well. So Durbin obviously was quite an influential figure on these young professionals at the time.
Yeah. No, he was solid enough. He was very, he looked like he was going to be part of the Durban Revolution for me. He was a different kind of centre back. He could play. He had a muckle shot on him.
He didn't want to leave, seemingly. He loved it at Sunderland as well. As you say, he was obviously a good player, important part of the team. He was sold or allowed to leave by Len Ashurst. So, it's the old tale of a new manager comes in. Yeah. He's senior under Durbin, and yet Ashurst comes in and wants his own men, moves him on.
Big characters, get rid of them. Clean the dressing room out.
Well, Len Ashurst, he said before, didn't he? Basically wanted he needed the money to bring his own players in. But you think of those two players, Bracewell and Atkins, and two players who went on to play for a side in the next season who almost did the treble. They won the first division title and Cup Winners' Cup the next season and got the FA Cup final. And that was two players we sold were in that squad.
Yeah. I don't think Atkins didn't play too much. I think he only played a handful of games.
Yeah, but they were part of it. I mean, they went to that team who were, top of the league.
Because then he went to Ipswich a season after, which is where we met Butcher. So that's where that kind of connection came.
So another Ipswich link. Yeah. I think if you lose players like that who are not just talented footballers, but also have that ability to talk others through the game and help run the game, I think that's a lot for a team to lose. As I say, in Atkins's case, he didn't even want to go. So when he then heard the offer of coming back to Sunderland, he saw it as a bit of unfinished business. Sadly for him, the unfinished business only lasted a couple of months, and he was asked to leave again.
Well, it's interesting because, as you say, Andrew, he was in charge of Cambridge the season before, and they went down on the last day of the season. I think they were away at West Ham, and we were away at Notts County, and we ended up staying up because they got beat. So there was this whole thing going on. So he got relegated because of us. After he left us, he went to Doncaster as manager, and they were in the division below us, so the third tier. And he played 7 games in that season. So your point about him potentially still having a bit to offer as a player coach in that period of time under Butcher, you're kind of surprised that wasn't, well, it might have been considered. We don't know, but I don't recall ever reading anything about it being a possibility. But, he potentially could have added something on the field for Butcher. But we've spoken a little bit about Paul Bracewell leaving the club then on the 29th of June, 1983. He signed for us on the first of 3 occasions as a player. We've talked about Paul Bracewell a number of times on these pods already, and the amount of times he came back to the club and did things in various roles. But 1983, 29th of June, he signed from Stoke City for 225 grand.
Sorry, just quickly on Paul Bracewell. I know we've talked about it a lot, but one thing, because we saw a different Paul Bracewell. If you ever want to see the Paul Bracewell that he could have been in the possibly 50, 60 England caps, look on clips of him at Everton before he got the injury. Marauding, box to box, unbelievable midfield. People would have been looking back on Paul Bracewell as one of England's best midfielders if he hadn't picked up that injury.
I can remember that goal that is was it on 101 Great Goals? It was Andy Gray scoring against us.
Or goals. One of the two.
One of the two. It was Andy
Oh,
Gray scoring for Everton against us in 85, maybe.
Yeah.
And Bracewell plays the most brilliant long-range pass over the
Ridiculous.
right-hand flank, I think to Trevor Stephen, who then crosses it for Andy Gray to score. And it's that ball, it's that pass, that's the reason that it goes on that video. Such a good pass. On the 29th of June in 1995, another player who kept coming back to the club in various guises, Brian Robson, he came in, and we talked about Jimmy Montgomery coming back as youth team coach under Terry Butcher. In 1995, Pop Robson came back as youth team coach to replace Monty. So that's, again, another, well, both couple of players who kept coming back for different sorts of roles at different times. And I read also, going back to Ian Atkins, talking about people coming back in 2011, he was a scout for us. So he did some scouting for us in 2000s. And he had set up or recommended a deal for Rakitic for 400 grand. Even
Was that the Croatian? Isn't he the
Croatian
player?
Barcelona.
Yeah. Oh, so, just a top-class footballer for peanuts, basically, is what you're saying.
He recommended that we sign him for 400 grand, and the club never pursued it. So
he must be sick of Sunderland. He's been sacked twice. He scouted a potential superstar, and we've just ignored him. He must think, why am I bothering with this lot?
God loves a try, though, doesn't he? 29th of June 2017, Simon Grayson was appointed, so we'll skip over that one. And on the 29th of June in 2006, a very, very key part of our 1964 promotion-winning team, Jimmy McNab, passed away, aged of 66, really young. It was only a few years after his testimonial was held at the Stadium Light, wasn't he? But Kelvin, this is somebody who you will have seen play in the flesh.
I did. He's obviously part of that trio of halfbacks, Anderson, Hurley, and McNab, and then Harvey, Hurley, and McNab. And I don't know whether you've lined this up deliberately, but it's great that we've had the chance to talk about Hurley recently and Harvey, and now we're talking about Jim McNab. What a guy! What a player he was. Scott, born in Denny. I'm going to come back to that and tell you a funny story about that in relation to his testimonial. He'd 2 Scottish schoolboy caps. He'd trial at Celtic off the back of that at 14 years old. They asked him to come and he said no. And he went and played for left wing for Kilsyth Rangers. And that's where he was spotted in what they call Scottish junior football, the tier before the league, lower than the leagues there, playing for Kilsyth Rangers on the left wing. And off he goes to Sunderland in 1956. He turns pro at 17 in 1957, and then gets his debut along with Cease Irwin and Len Ashurst. And those three play an awful lot of games together through the late 50s and early 60s. That season he got his debut was our first season in the second division, first ever season in the second division. And he plays 11 games. He looks like he plays 11 games just about on the trot. He looks like he's a shoe-in, very assured despite his young years, playing alongside Hurley and Anderson. Hurley's 21, 22, Anderson 25, I think, at the time. But he breaks his leg after 11 games and doesn't make it back till 3 games into the following season. Still a young lad, but comes straight back into the team and plays 38 games on just about on the trot. We've said this about quite a few players, haven't we? These legends that we've got within our team, their appearance stats and their ability to turn out week after week after week. Brilliant, comes back from his broken leg, plays 38 games in the 59 60 season, goes into 60, 61, plays 45, and starts scoring goals. This lad, for the position that he played, from his first full season, he scores an average of 3 goals a season. It doesn't sound a lot, but it's a contribution to the goals, And 61, 62, 51 games. When you look at his appearance stats there, he's just there every game, And then into his 6th season, 62, 63, and we've got Martin Harvey joins that half-back line. Jimmy Munty, by this point, joins the happy 5. The 5 becomes 6. You've got Irwin, Ashurst, Harvey, Hurley, McNab, and Jimmy Munty becomes the goalie that's there every week, but like the rest of them, And in 63, 64, the promotion season, he's there just about every game. He plays 41 games, gets his 3 goals for the season. But he cracked his shin in the March of that. I hadn't realised this. I thought he'd played every game of the promotion-winning season in 63, 64. But when I dug into it, there he is for the just about midway through February. He cracks his shin and he misses March, but comes back and finishes the season playing in his favoured left half berth. And we're talking about this last week, I think, about the formation that them lads played, this half-back line of three players then does really, really well. I mean, you look at what the players who played with him said, that the likes of Argus, who I was talking about last week, who could be savage if you weren't playing well, he said about that half-back line, Hurley's the icon, McNab's the hard man, and Martin Harvey gives the trio a touch of class. And that's generally what folk, when I started watching them, and some of the older lads that I used to speak to about the team and the players and stuff, that was generally what they would say about McNab. That he was key to that half-back line, and he always struck me by the time I'd finished watching him. I don't know if you had this experience at school, I always think of him as like the quiet kid at school he's not the biggest, but when you look at him, you just know you mess with him at your peril. Do you know what I'm talking about there? He's not necessarily shouting the odds and, being a big bully or anything like that, but he just had a look about him. When I started watching him, he just looked a tough guy. He really did. And that's certainly one of the things that a lot of the players that played with him said, he was frightened of nobody, and but he could play a bit. Hurley, who played with him a lot, called him Mac the Knife. That was his name for him, and he described him as a hard defensive-minded player, reliable and dependable, and a complete privilege to play with. That's what Hurley said about him. Now, the reason he might have said that was when Hurley goes on his charges up, quite often it's Jim McNab that's sitting back there, letting Hurley charge up the pitch. So he plays loads and loads of games with that fivesome, when Ashurst, Jimmy Munty, Hurley, McNab, Harvey by now in there. They're like a settled 5-6 if you had Munty in there. Len Ashurst always preferred him, coming on to this next season where Jim Baxter arrives, and obviously they're back in the first division under George Hardwick, and he plays a lot of games, and George Hardwick helps them sort themselves out in the first division, but it's still ostensibly the same back 5, and they survive that first season. Baxter comes on board and things start to change because Ian McCull comes in as manager. But it's hard to talk about him without not talking about Jim Baxter. from this point on in McNab's career, because Baxter's preferred position was left half. He liked to play from the back and liked to be able to see the whole of the pitch and pick his space and pick his pass. And of course, left half was McNab's position. That was where he played. And when you look at that season, from that point with McCall and Baxter, he's starting to play less games. He's being moved about the park a bit. They played him the first time I saw him play in the 65-66 season. He was playing inside left. He was up the park, and I mean, he was putting a shift in, but he wasn't an inside left. He wasn't a forward, and that was really about accommodating Jim Baxter within the team. And I say that to you, having said to you plenty of times, I loved watching Jim Baxter play, but I didn't realise as a kid everything that was going on there, about how people were being moved about to accommodate him. And Len Ashurst, he just, if I took Len Ashurst, we're talking about him just before they're coming in, and Brace and Atkins going, but as a player, Len Ashurst loved playing with Jim McNab. He said he was just so dependable, and would he'd put his head in a cement mixer to win you the ball, and Baxter posted missing defensively as far as Len Ashurst was concerned. He great on the ball, pretty crap off it would be would be Ashurst's,
Just quickly on that, Kelvin, because you talk about all those great defenders in that time, and in my mind, they're all just stoppers. They're all just kind of old-fashioned, because obviously I didn't see them in the flesh, but you've got this impression of them that they're all just big fellas heading the ball out. I mean, how true is that? Because that's just an impression that you build up because they're all big players. But were they all good on the ball, or did they all?
I think Argus called it right with that half-back line. Hurley and Harvey could play. They were very, very good on the ball. Jim McNab wasn't bad on the ball. It was just he had two lads playing beside him that were particularly good on the ball.
Did they have certain roles to play at their strengths?
Yeah. So as I say, when Hurley used to go up, McNab used to slot in. He'd be the one that was back there. He was probably my memory of him, and then reading about him as I became interested in him, I would say he was more, I agree with Charlie Hurley, he was definitely more defensively minded, tackling, winning. He would tackle and win the ball and give it to somebody that could play, a bit. He was that kind of player for me. He played quite a few games with George Bullet Mulhall. He quite often in my mind's eye, I have this picture of him sliding balls out to Mulhall, winning the ball and just giving him the ball to play away, as Mulhall used to do, just bomb down his wing. So he was he probably would fit the mold that you've just described there of being a defensive stopper kind of player. He was only 5'9" though. He wasn't. He looked taller than he was because he used to have the shock of black curly hair, and he was lean. He was, there wasn't a pick on him in terms of fat. But when you saw him with his shirt off, he was sort of ripped a bit. He was just one of these lean, hard boys. That would. He would win you the ball and give you the ball. And he was reasonably quick as well. Definitely memories of seeing he could turn if somebody got past him and get himself back. And he lacked nothing in. I mean, when you put him out on the pitch, for me, my memory of him, and certainly hearing what other players had to say about him, was this lad he was in the trenches with you. He was a boy that to go to war with, like. Jim McNab. So but he suffered a bit in that McCall kind of era. Baxter comes in, and then you bugger the next season. He's got Colin Todd, young Toddy Stutz. You know, and I mean, who's going to argue? You couldn't argue with Colin Todd being in the team. He was bloody great, you know, and he starts to struggle.
Kelvin, just before you kind of start going forward, just in that going back to the kind of Hurley era when all of that, in terms of Hurley going up, because we talked previously about Hurley potentially being one of the first to go up. I mean, was it always just Hurley, or did we end up saying, oh, you know, we'll get all the big lads up for corners?
Well, C. Sherwin used to, I think we were talking about him last week, and he used to, I don't know whether that was a plan or not. There seemed to be a thing about right backs that wouldn't do what the managers say. I don't know if that was a plan or not, but I mean, he was a big lad, so he used to, my memory is he used to sneak in there. Harvey and McNab, maybe it depend what side the corner kick would be on. I've got that kind of memory of it as well. Ashurst, if it was on the left-hand side, Ashurst would stay back, you know, and hang back, but and Erwin would go in, you know, so it might depend on whether that's my faulty memory or not, but that's the way I remember that is.
So it was Hurley that started it, was it? And then the rest started thinking, oh, actually, that's a good idea, or was it always just Hurley was the main man when it came to corners?
Well, you know, I mean, I think, didn't we have a conversation a couple of weeks ago about Reg Pierce? He used to like a dander up, but going up for corner kicks, Hurley was he was encouraged by Stan Anderson, I think, to go charging up for corner kick. And I do have recollection of McNab. I'm thinking about myself in the boys' enclosure at the Roker end and us having corners, and McNab was definitely in the box for some of them. I can absolutely tell you that. And C. Sherwin as well, and Lenny Ashurst. But I cannot tell you that all of them were in the box at the same time. I don't have any.
I think we've established, haven't we, that we've been the club who have pioneered centre-halves going up for corners and defenders attacking corners. Charlie Buchan's invented football tactics, we've discovered, and so Tony Norman was the first dribbling goalkeeper. So I think what we're coming to the conclusion of is that Sunderland really have been pivotal in the development of everything that's good in football.
Aye, absolutely, yeah, definitely. He was he definitely he was a lad that would appear in the box for free kicks and corner kicks. McNab. He was a strong lad, and for his height, I hadn't realised he was just 5'9". But everywhere I've looked, it says he's 5'9", and I would have told you he was just under 6 foot. But I'm guessing that some of that's to do with his build and the shock of black curly hair that he had when he played. I was surprised at that, the 5'9".
So Kelvin, when I look back on Jimmy McNab's career at Sunderland, for the amount of games he plays and the reputation he has, to then leave the club at 27-year-old,
he wasn't getting games,
and it was that the sole reason. That was the sole reason.
So my understanding was, I mean, there was a lot of disharmony in that dressing room, you know, in the McCauley era. A lot of people unhappy. There were two camps in the dressing room, the Hurley camp and the Baxter camp. The tactics, we're talking about this last week, 4-4-2 coming in, and maybe, I would have said as well, playing in the first division, playing in the top division, I do feel that it was, when I think back to that maybe that was part of the reason that he moved on as well. But so I don't know that it would be any one reason. I think it was just not getting games, combination of not getting games, pretty unhappy dressing room, and not being played in his favourite position. You know, he liked to play left off. But actually, he moves on to Preston and ends up playing lots of games at left back. But the game's changed. We were talking about this last week. Yeah. The game's changed, and he was a left footer. and he went to play left back and did a really good job for Preston. I mean, if McCall had McCall didn't seem to have any problem playing him. It was just he wanted him to play all over the place, inside left. He filled in at centre half in the middle of defence. He played a few positions that season before he left. He kind of got shuttled about quite a bit, but I cannot recollect that he ever played left back. It's a funny thing because McCall had a big problem with Ashurst. He would have replaced Ashurst as quickly as possible if he could have done, because there was something between them two that was more than just football, I think, Ashurst and McCall. So
it's interesting when you kind of look back on that spell at Preston as well, because in the season that we won the FA Cup, so in 1973, Preston were in the second division as we were.
Yeah.
Bob Stoker had signed Ron Guthrie to play left back, I think from Newcastle, hadn't he?
Yeah.
In the December time. Jimmy McNab was playing left back in the second division for Preston, and he played against us. He was. Left back. So that's one of those where, to me, looking back, it kind of seems different eras. But McNab could very easily have been playing for us at Wembley.
He could have a bit like Martin Harvey. He could have. He wasn't that much older than Martin Harvey, and he could have, and definitely. I mean, he played against that team. He played in 71-72 against us. I don't know if you can remember this, and if Jim McNab was alive, he wouldn't thank us for this, but that famous game, somebody, I think Andrew, you wrote about this, Jimmy Chico Hamilton comes on. Andrew shrugging his shoulders.
I'll take your word for it.
Ask him was good. If he says yes, claim it.
Yeah.
Jimmy Chico Hamilton comes on 80 minutes against Preston at Roker. I was at this game, and Jim McNab played for Preston at left back that day, and it was a crazy game. We went 3-1 up. They come back to threes each, and we're going into the last 5 minutes of the game. We bring this young laddie on, Chico Hamilton, 16 years old, and he scores with a brave challenge at the back post. Yeah.
Funnily enough, I do remember this one. I think
he does now.
Yeah. No. I'm genuinely. I think the bit I liked about. Yeah. I think the bit I liked about it was apparently Hamilton, after the game, just gets his usual bus home. So he's queuing up. He gets on the bus, and the bussie's like, that. "Oh, yeah, were you at the match, son? What was the score?" And of course he says, "Oh, I Sunderland won. I scored the winner." And I think the bus driver must have been thinking, "Get off your cheeky note." It was a genuine question. So yeah, I don't know how much I've got home that day, but Hamilton had a tricky bus ride.
Well, he scores that. I don't know if you can remember, but I actually interviewed Jimmy Hamilton. Yeah. I spoke with him, and he told us about that. He said he'd come out the ground. First of all, when he was on the way out the ground, we digress here, as we like to. He comes down the stairs. He's on his way out, and Billy Hughes and Ian Porterfield are walking up the stairs to the players' lounge with their wives. And he says, "Are you coming up for a drink, Jimmy?" And he says, "No, I have to get home. My landlady's made my tea." So he comes out the ground, and there's a load of young lads standing there wanting his autograph. He signs a couple, but he gets his eye on the bus. And I'm trying to remember the name of there was a special name for the bus that used to take him. I mentioned it to a couple of other boys. The Economic. And he goes, he's running. He like signs a couple of autographs, but he starts to run for the bus, and these young lads start chasing him. And he gets on the bus and like jumps on the bus, and the bus driver's like, "What?" The bus driver's sort of looking at him, going, "What the hell?" And wait, have you been at the game, son? Thinking it was trouble or something like that. Aye. Who scored the goals? And as you say, he says who scores the goals, and then he says, "And I scored the last one." He says, "I went and sat in my seat, and I could see the driver like peering round his driver's cab as if to say, this cheeky young'un, so he's 16 years old. He was our youngest player to score a goal, but the goal that he scored, I mean, it was a really brave header at the back post, and he clatters the post when he scores, but there's two defenders close to him, and as I say, Jim McNab wouldn't be happy about this, but Jim McNab was one of them. Whether he lets him do it or not, I don't know, but I don't think he would. I don't think it was in his makeup. So that game was 71-72, and then you're dead right, Martin, about 72-73. I got down to that Preston game. That we were right in the middle of our FA Cup run, and I got a lift down to that Preston game, and I tell you, what a team! Preston have got some great players that went on to really make a mark, like Alex Bruce. They had Big John Bird playing for them, Mel Holden, and Tony Morley. If you can remember Tony Morley playing for Aston Villa and the team that won the league in the Europe. I mean, they had some cracking players, Preston, and my point of saying that is there's Jim McNab playing at left back, holding his place down in that team.
And we talked about Martin Harvey and Cecil Irwin as well, who could have easily, not for circumstance, but a year or two. And Martin's absolutely right. When you think about these being two completely different eras, but actually one's quite close to the other, and in another universe somewhere, they all play in the 73 Cup final. Yeah. Just quickly, and I'm going to completely digress here, and apologies if we keep on going with McNab, but one question, because it keeps coming up, and I heard John Ficklin talk about this, and like my dad talked about this, but I've never actually heard the Roker End boys enclosure.
Yeah,
I keep hearing about this, and it keeps coming up. But what exactly was it?
It was like a pen that you hide your kids into. It was like a playpen that you hide your kids into, and now you'd see a lot of dads, and mostly dads, standing at the sort of quite close to it, but the kids would just get hid into it. I'm probably making light of it there. I think it was an innovation that came in 65, 66, if I remember rightly. I think it did. Just somebody will put me right on that. Somebody will let me know exactly when it happened. I think it was part of the preparations for the World Cup, and when I started going, that's where we used to get deposited, was in the boys' enclosure. And I'll tell you, there were girls in there as well, breaking the rules. It was my first contact with girls that were possibly interested in us, was in the boys' enclosure of the Roker End, Hey, it's not just about football, this, it's about life. The boys' enclosure, but you used to get fathers would be parked the other side of the fence. And what I loved about you've set me away now. What I loved about the boys' enclosure was that the adults were there, but they weren't right there. So there was the opportunity for a little bit of mayhem and nonsense without necessarily, so. And there were some, once or twice people got their scarves nicked and stuff like that, but most of it was just nonsense, daft carry on and stuff like that. And I always remember Jimmy Monty, whenever he used to take his place in the Roker End goal, he always had a wave and a wink for the boys' enclosure. He used to like wave at you. My first game, I'll still swear to this day that he looked right at me, winked at me, and waved as if to say, "I see you there," Welcome to Roker Park, Kelvin, So that's what the boys' enclosure was. It was a great little innovation for fathers to hide their kids in and just go away and watch the game, supposedly without worrying about them. But I learned some stuff in that boys' enclosure. Not all of it about football.
But I bet there's loads of dads listening to this now thinking, bring it back.
Great idea.
Aye, it would need to have some netting on the roof as well, like they used to have at Blimmin' Everton used to have that, didn't they? If the police nicked you in the late 60s, early 70s, they used to put you in this cage above the stand, and everybody could see you that you'd been nicked, but you know what, you got to watch the game. And Sunderland used to get hoyed out, you know.
We'll not ask how you know all that, Kelvin.
Well, there you go. There you go.
That's Kelvin speechless. Let's move.
We better not go to that one. I think my mother started listening to these pods. She's aye. So I mean, what I think that says about Jim McNab, just jumping back to him, because he is a lad that deserves his place in our annals, if you want, the same as Buchan, Jim deserves his place as he starts playing at a really difficult time for the club, and him, Hurley, Anderson, Harvey, the form are really, really solid, the hinge of the team that allows us to eventually get out of the league. And then the point about the Preston, talking about him with Preston, you're quite right, Chris, is he's developed these games so that he can continue playing. And, he's no longer the shoe-in at left half kind of thing. He's managed to develop his game and get himself a game in a pretty good team. That is, I say that Preston team were good value. They were a burgeoning team, Preston, at the time. And he's holding his place down in that team. Really interesting character. I know I said this about Martin Harvey, but when you start looking into these lads and you go online and you look at, there's a couple of older boys that I travel on the bus with to games, and I love a bit crack with them, and there's one of them new, Jim McNab. He's sort of, after he'd finished with football, he relocates back to the northeast. He comes back, and he's not from here, but he's played these 6, 7, 8 years with us, and he comes back to the northeast and settles here. He's got shares in a garage cum body repair shop. I think he helped Bobby Kerr out at the Cocktail Pub when Kerr was managing that, and he does a bit of insurance work as well. So he settles back in the northeast, and he hadn't had a testimonial. He'd left that year, 67, I think it was, January 67, I think it was, that he left, looking for games, to Preston. So he hadn't had a testimonial or anything. And in 2006, was it 2006, the testimonial?
No, 99.
99, right.
It was the first testimonial at the Stadium of Light.
I was just going to say that, yeah. And I've got a funny story to tell you about that. And I was gutted because I really wanted to go to that, just based on, he was one of the lads that was playing the first time I went, and I really wanted to go. But I used to work at delivering training in health and social care, and I was up in Cumbernauld delivering training that day, and just no chance of getting back for it. And at the lunchtime, I was chewing my gums a bit about it. I've never really grown up, If I miss a game that I want to go to, I'm chewing my gums a bit about it. And at the lunchtime, I'm in Cumbernauld here, and these two lasses on the training course came and sat beside me and asked me a couple of questions about the training. And then I said, "Where are you from?" And she said, "Oh, just down the road, Denny, a little place called Denny. You'll never have heard about it." So, of course, I sets myself away. And I said, "Oh, Denny, Jim McNab, what are the chances? It's his testimonial at Sunderland, and we'll have this lovely, lovely conversation, I thought it was more about Jim McNab and, that there was more to it. I thought I asked them more questions about life and Denny and stuff like that, because they were just young girls starting out on their careers, and about a month later, I gets a call from the organisation that had contracted me. And this is, we need to speak to you about the feedback of this training from the attenders. I think, oh, shit, and it never crossed my mind that it would be these two girls, because they'd been a bit of argy-bargy about a couple of things in the train. I thought, this grumpy old witch has said something about me or something, and right, I'm ready, I was ready for a bit of a do with the training officer for this. He says, I just want to read out what the feedback's been. He said the two girls have signed a joint feedback form, and it said, this is what it said. I've written it down. It said, we really enjoyed this training and learnt loads. The best bit was learning all about Denny's very own Jim McNab.
This Kelvin, this is what happens when you learn how to talk to girls at the Roker End Boys Enclosure. You just assume all lasses want to hear, when they're being chatted up, want to hear about
I tell you, Andrew, that boys enclosure set me up for life, boy. I tell you,
I can tell. You're getting feedback. You're getting feedback on the back of it. So you must have had a way with words to impress the ladies.
Yeah. It was a strange, I know. I mean, some people just write this stuff off, but what are the chances of on the very day that his testimonial was? And I'm thinking about this. I feel like I almost, what's the word, manifested these two, so that I could talk about it, and settle myself down. Fantastic. They were, because they'd never heard of Jim McNab. But, I felt like I really contributed to their careers there by...
Do we all know, like, coming back to the actual testimonial, I mean, because you said he didn't have one, but... I mean, I'm looking. It's kind of roughly. Was he there actually at the club 10 years, or was it just less than that? Because I don't know what the criteria was, and actually how it came round to organising one in 1999. How it all came about.
Well, he wasn't there, and I don't know too much about why it came about. I do know that I would be one of a number of people of that era that would say it's a really good thing that it did come about. Do you know, Andrew?
I feel as if Bob Murray, who is a regular presence on this pod, I feel as if it was Bob Murray that saw to it. And I'm wondering, I'm trying to work out the timelines as I speak. Would Bob Murray have been watching McNab, or could he have perhaps been a favourite of his dad's or something like that?
Well, John Ficklin was, definitely, because he's talked about that. He's talked about being in the boys' enclosure like Kelvin.
Oh, right. Okay. Well,
there must be partners in crime, I guess, at the time in the boys' enclosure.
Yeah.
He was a little bit older than me, Murray. A little bit.
We were talking a few weeks ago, Chris, weren't we, about Bob Murray's age when he became chairman of Sunderland. So he's around 40 in 86. So chances are he probably did. Watch him as a youngster growing up. But that testimonial, it always puzzled me, that testimonial, because as far as I remember, I was had a season ticket that season. We just won the championship. We got promoted to the Premier League only a couple of days before we played that game against Birmingham at the end of the season where we got the trophy. And then the Tuesday night, 6,000 odd people turn up to watch a good first year. I think Niall Quinn played in goal and Tommy Sorensen played up front and stuff like that. It was kind of mixed up team, but it was a lot of the regular players playing against the Jimmy McNab All-Stars team, which featured Chris Turner, John Kane, Nick Pickering, Gary Howes, Gary Bennett, Lee Howie, Chris Waddle, Peter Reid, Marco, Eric Gates, Craig Russell, Richie Pitt, Jeff Clark, Barry Dunn, Gordon Armstrong, Pop Robson, and Jimmy McNab himself came off and scored a very late, dubious penalty to win the game 4-2. But it always puzzled me that he got quite a very low crowd, really, for the calibre of players that had kind of come together to play that game.
Yeah, it was dead disappointing. I was disappointed in that when I saw what the attendance was. It's a Tuesday night. I don't know. Is it too far away for a lot of our younger fans to, do they not appreciate who he is? But we have just got the trophy. You would have thought it would have been a nice excuse to come into the ground and celebrate. Really,
I remember it wasn't very well publicised at all. I think
I was
we
just
found
about to
out
say,
on the Saturday that was happening on Tuesday.
I remember not even knowing about it and being gutted that I didn't go. And one of the lads who did go, who didn't mention it, I was going off it with him because he was talking, because Marco apparently scored a cracking volley or half volley or something like that. And I was absolutely devastated that I hadn't gone. But I remember I was at the Birmingham game and I would, anything Sunderland related, I was going home and away at this point, and I didn't know this was happening. And I was absolutely devastated the week after when I was getting told about it.
No, I was the same.
Did we also play Liverpool in some sort of centenary event? I wonder if that maybe people could only afford to go to one of the two and pick that one, perhaps?
We did the week after. Was it
the week after?
It was exactly a week after. And we had 18,000 there. So that was some sort of centenary game. Still, I just think both of them, but certainly that the Jimmy McNab testimonial just wasn't publicised at all. Which is a shame.
I'm going to show off and upset all of you by the sound.
You were there.
I was there, yeah, and it was a good fun night, as you say. I remember Sorensen play. Kelvin's fuming here. You at least got to speak to two young lasses by the sounds of it, so your day wasn't a complete write-off. I seem to remember Sorensen playing outfield, as was mentioned, and it was just it wasn't a serious game of football where it's tactics and 90 minutes of proper play. It was more an exhibition type of thing. It was good fun. So sorry to tell you that, gents.
What was Marco volley from the halfway line like?
I can't remember that, but I remember. Yes, have you seen this, Kelvin?
I'm sure Marco scored a hat trick that night, Chris.
Right. I mean, Marco Gabbiadini is probably, he was my first Sunderland hero, and up with Niall Quinn for my all-time favourite Sunderland player. So we should
have had him in the strikers list, shouldn't we?
Well,
you might put him second.
First perhaps. But there you go.
Gav would have just had a question mark next to him.
Yeah. Yet another podcast where we could say we'll end up doing a special. We'll do a special on Marco Gabbiadini one day. But I don't remember the specific goals, Chris, but I do remember being chuffed a bit to see him play for Sunderland again.
So all right, Andrew. Clearly, you know what I mean.
Well, I tell you what,
bringing all these painful memories back.
I tell you what, lads, it was rubbish. I'll just make it up.
You're making us feel much better now.
Now I think about it, I think the wind was whipping in and the rain was horizontal, and it was a complete washout. Now that you mention it,
nil draw.
I tell you what, when you look at the turnout for Jim McNab's All Stars, that's a fearsome list, because I think Brian Robson from Borough. Yeah, that he was the Borough manager at the time, was he? Brian Robson.
They all turned out for him.
Yeah.
Well, was it Brian Robson, Man U in England, or was it Pop Robson?
It wasn't Pop Robson. It was Brian Robson. Yeah.
Oh, well, there's an update for the Fat Cat, because they've got linked to Pop Robson.
Oh, I thought it's just a lad, a mate of mine. God, here we go again. You know, would I bet a month's wages on it? I just always remember him saying to me that
we gather around the campfire, toast our marshmallows, listening to Kelvin. He's another one. Brilliant.
A mate of mine, he said that Brian Robson, he said he looked like he could still do business. Was what he said. That's why I remember he was talking about Brian Robson, the Borough in ex-Man United. Boy, he dies. You know, it was sad that when you think that that's 1999, I couldn't quite remember the date of that. In 2006, he passes away at 66. I mean, it's salutary that I'm actually 67, you know, so you think, God, it's no age at all, that. And he's buried in Ryup Cemetery, so he settles, you know, he comes back to the northeast and settles settles here. And I think I started to say that before, when you dig into what folk have said about him and what kind of person was he in that, you get a lot, the old worthy on the bus that sort of knew him. He says, no airs and graces about Jim McNab. He's just an ordinary fella. Easy to get along with and speak to. He's no airs and graces, Jimmy Montgomery rated him, I actually remember him seeing this written way back. I'm probably going to say it to you, I think, early 80s or something. Jim was talking about Charlie Hurley, and he said that Charlie Hurley had a magnificent career with Sunderland. It was only right in 1979 that he was voted Player of the Century. He was a tremendous player. He did, however, have some very good players playing alongside him, including Jim McNab and Martin Harvey. And that was Monty's take on what Player of the Century, So fantastic servant to the club, I think, and another really interesting character in a different kind of way. One I've never forgotten him. He's just one of these guys that was playing the first time I went, and I've just never sort of lost track of him.
Excellent. Well, I think that is a very, very, very good place to wrap it up for this week. So thank you to Kelvin and Andrew and Chris. And Andrew took off early. He's obviously a part-timer, isn't he? So Chris, do you want to do the honours with Andrew's quiz? That gives a little hint as to somebody who we will be talking about next week.
Yes, and I had to think about this, and
no, I did as well.
Until he sent the answer, I was thinking about it. But yeah. So talking about this fella next time, born on the 4th of July, Independence Day, 1954. He grew up in the Northeast and was a big Sunderland fan, absolute Sunderland nut. And then he was a stalwart at Aldershot, where he met a few characters, which we might get into, playing at Aldershot in the 70s. And then he ended up coming to Roker the following decade in the late 80s via, well, let's say,
we'll give it away.
Yeah. Let's just say he went further afield. Let's say in between. But that's the quiz question.
Good. So we'll look forward to that one. In between now and then, we have got podcasts coming out every day, so there's always something to listen to. Whether you're walking the dog, you're at the gym, making your tea, or driving to work. So keep an eye out on the However the podcast feeds. And don't forget to check out rokerreport.sbnation.com for all of your Sunderland news and views. And please don't forget to drop us a line at howeverthepodcast@safc@gmail.com if you have any stories to share or things come up over the next few weeks that you'd like us to cover, or if you want to know more about Kelvin being strung up by rope at Everton. So, until then, it's goodbye from us.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.